Hey, good morning and welcome to my morning drive. I skipped out on the gym this morning, so I had some stuff that I wanted to talk about. I didn't really get a chance to on my drive yesterday, so I figured, why not do it this morning? I wanted to pick up a little bit from my last entry, where I was talking about Battle Angel and Detective Pikachu and making good adaptations. I have talked about dramatic construction before. I covered that on the theory video where I talked about moral criticism. And I wanted to delve back into that a little bit because what I was saying about what makes an adaptation a good adaptation is when it feels like the source material. That's dramatic construction pretty much to a T. That is like everything that Aristotle talked about. So I wanted to delve back into that a little bit and maybe talk a little bit more about what I mean, because it took me a while in the video to get to that, and I felt like I kind of rushed through it in that part of the talk because I was looking at how much time I had left on my video, because unfortunately with my phone I'm working with limited memory space. I still have a ton of pictures I'm trying to clear off my phone. So, because I do what everybody does with the phone, right? I use it to snap family pictures and stuff like that. So I want to make sure I've got, all those happy memories, stored up somewhere, because honestly, when my kids are grown, I'll go and I'll look at every single one of them. I know that. It's just what you do. So, and I want to make sure they're digitally stored. Anyhow, I digress. So yeah, I do feel like I kind of rushed through that, and so I wanted to step back and talk about that a little bit more. This will probably be repetitive. This will be repetitive from some of the last video, and I'm sorry about that. But hopefully we can expand on some of those ideas. So, I gushed at length about both movies, and I said, what made them a good adaptation. Both of them had, I mentioned this last time, both of them have advantages when it comes to being adapted. While Battle Angel Alita was a graphic novel and a manga, it had already seen adaptation to anime. So there was already trial and error with translating it from the page to a screen. Pokemon was created to be multimedia. You have always, as far as I am aware, you have always had the manga and the movies, the anime and the movies. I don't know if there's manga or not. I wouldn't be surprised if there is. The card games, the video games, the toys, all of that is, has, as far as I know, always existed with Pokemon. So there is not really any trial and error in translating that. The only difference is translating it from animated to live action. And when it comes to how you want these characters to look, or how your world should look, all of that is pretty tried and true. It was created in a way for defining that, and how to make callbacks in all your little different things, so that you have callbacks in the card game to the TV show, and callbacks in the TV show to the card games, and callbacks to everything, including the X-Files in the video games. So it's it just was made to be multimedia. So they have advantages there, but that said, that isn't to say that there's not something both can teach about how to do adaptation well. And the thing with both of them, when I wrote my blog entry about Battle Angel, when I had walked out, when the movie ended, I didn't want the movie to end. I wanted to stay there. I felt very much like I was in Alita's world. As horrible as that world is for the people who live in it, it's an incredible world, and I felt like I was in it with characters that I love, and I didn't want to leave. And that's where the real heart of an adaptation is. It's not in the plot, right? We can forgive a lot of plot adaptations in movies when they go from books or whatever, because we do it all the time. Books are, very often, huge and long and intertwined, and a author has a lot of room to develop out plot strings and stretch them out and tie them together and put them in nice, neat little knots at the end. You've got a lot of room to do that with a book that you don't necessarily have the room for in a movie. And you have to be careful in a movie to leave plot strings hanging for the next one, because one, if you don't have a next movie, then you're kind of screwed. But also, even when the viewer knows there's another movie that's going to come, depending on how that plot string is left hanging, it can leave them feeling unsatisfied, and not in a good way. So, yeah, it's not as easy to do that in visual media as it is in books. So we forgive a lot of changes that happen going from a book or from a comic book to a movie screen, because a lot of those changes are just necessary in order to make that plot translate and the overall story translate from a book to the TV screen or to the movie screen. Is it in the characters? Well, yes. But that kind of goes into my main point. The characters, whether in a book or whether in a movie, are our window to see a world. So when you're doing an adaptation, the more familiar that the characters feel to what you know from the books, the better it's going to be for you as the viewer looking at the world through their eyes. It's really the world itself that a writer has created, getting that translated onto the screen. If you do that well, you have got a lot of room for everything else. And that world is not just the physical look, right? As a writer, when I am creating the setting for a story and I am deciding how a government works, if it's, a fantasy world, or if I am deciding, for a realistic setting or semi-realistic setting, if I'm deciding how the police interact with the populace, or if I'm deciding how the school is run, those are decisions that I am making with a specific purpose. When I wrote Book of Dahlia, the high school that the characters attend is a charter school. It's run by a private company. I made that decision for a political reason. And those ideas create theme, and they add to the overall mood of a story. So when you're adapting from, book to screen, if you're changing those elements in significant ways, you're affecting how that world looks and feels to the viewer. And, a public school that is run through the education department is going to be very different from a charter school or from a magnet school. Even different types of public schools. Like the public school that I attended when I was growing up was not a charter school, but it was in a more affluent area, so it had a lot of money coming into it for funding, thanks to property taxes. And it also had to compete with like 2 different private schools that could draw students from this area. So, the school had to keep certain standards in order for the parents to want to keep their children there. And that's, if you're, when I wrote the school in Book of Dahlia, while I did make it a charter school, in that case, that idea of this, affluent school very much played into how I created it. So, and that's going to add a certain flavor to how the high school feels, to how the teachers operate, to what's available in the school, and the kind of opportunities that the kids have. So that's all really important. And, if something like that were to be adapted, it changing, something as simple as the type of school that it is going to have an echo effect on everything else with the setting, and it's not going to feel the same. If looking at Alita, the way that I had said, the city felt a little brighter than how I had always pictured it, but otherwise the city was very much spot on to the look and feel of the original manga. The city up above that I still am just not remembering the name of at the moment, is still tethered to Earth, but it like stretches way, 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 way up, and almost, I want to say that it goes out into orbit slightly, but I don't remember the whole physics and stuff with the cities. But it's just this amazing thing, and there is a thematic element to having those tethers there, and having the city below being where all the refuse goes. And if you were to change either of those 2 elements to make the movie, it would not have been the same movie. Just having a city that floats up in the clouds, not tethered, there's a different theme to the trash being dumped down than there is if it's tethered. If it's tethered, but it's not dumping its trash, there's a very different theme. So, these little details, they matter big time when you're adapting. The aesthetic choices with the characters, like I said last time, making Alita have the big eyes is off-putting when you first see them. For somebody who's used to big eye art, I got accustomed to it very, very quickly. I understand other people had the same reaction. It's off-putting at first and you get accustomed to it very quickly, but that is very much the aesthetic of the character, and it helps you feel this is Alita very, very quickly. And so having those elements, those important descriptors come through from one medium to the new medium, that helps in creating a character that you recognize, and then recognizing it, loving it, and then loving it can see through it. So it's that's what I'm talking about as far as bringing over the feel from the original medium to movie, is these details. And once you have these details in place, once you're making it feel like the setting, when you have the characters feel like the characters, then you've got a lot to work with. Adding in a character or blending a couple of roles together or whatever, changing it so that it's not Ito's dog that Alita is named after, but Ito's dead daughter. These are changes that you can work with, because so much of the foundation and groundwork to make this feel authentic to what it was is there. A warning though, characterization, bringing over a character, making it feel authentic, is not just a matter of how that character looks. It is also how the character acts. Ito is still Ito because he acts the way he acted in the comic. He makes the same kind of choices. He has the same mystery to him. He has the same ideals. These things are important. If you change those things significantly, it doesn't matter how the character looks, they're not going to be authentic. And if the character's choices have to change because of the change that you had to make in plot, that's fine, but those changes still have to follow with who the character is. When we look at a character on a page and then we look at a character on a screen, and those two characters are significantly different, we don't feel like they have been adapted. We feel like they have been bastardized. So there you go. And while yes, both of these properties have advantages for adaptation, that doesn't mean that they can't still be a guide for adaptation. It actually means that because you have those advantages, you actually have a much higher, chance of succeeding in adapting them, which, they did. And so having that success, you actually have a much clearer picture of what it takes to make an adaptation good. I'm thinking now about, the adaptations that people have not liked, even when the properties themselves were enjoyed. the adaptation aspect of them were not. And these are going to come from other YouTubers talking about these properties. So I'll try to collect all of the links and put them in the description. Folding Ideas talks about adapting Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series and how horrible of an adaptation that was. And one of the key problems with it was how characters were adapted. There was a key female character who's apparently really, really awesome in the books and is nothing like her book self in the movie or series or whatever it was. Unfortunately, I never saw it, so I'm having to go off of what he stated. He is talking about a character whose adaptation is not staying true to what was on the page. She may have had a look and costuming that matched, but she's not true to what she actually is. Lindsay Ellis talks about, she has a whole series talking about the Transformers. And one of the things that she talks about is how, people do not like how the Transformers, which was just a cartoon about toys, made to sell toys. And I enjoyed the cartoons when I was a kid. I was not a huge Transformers fan. I won't even lie on that. But I enjoyed the cartoons from time to time. My cousins had Transformers sometimes, and it was fun to play with them. You went from, simple thing to something that has base politique added to it, where it's, why are you going to enjoy these robots when you have the hot girl kind of thing. And that was not a theming adaptation that a lot of viewers, especially those going to it for the adaptation, appreciated. There's another example of how these things don't work quite so well. Folding Ideas has a few videos where he talks about Man of Steel. Man of Steel tries to follow in the vein of the Dark Knight trilogy in adding a grimdark to Superman. And with the success of the Dark Knight trilogy, I get wanting to go with grimdark because we seem to like grimdark. But Man of Steel kind of shows very well we don't want grimdark on characters that aren't supposed to be grimdark. I'm not a Superman fan. I think I may have mentioned this in the last video. I'm not really a Superman fan. I loved Superman in the movies when I was a kid, but I never got into the Superman comic books. I couldn't get into them. But Superman is supposed to be the ideal hero. He is not supposed to be grimdark. And trying to make him that way kind of ruins the purpose of the character. There's this thematic element to him, right? This metaphorical thing that does not exist and does not work when he's grimdark. So, that's why that didn't work. You know, to talk about something that changes some stuff from the source material to the screen. Game of Thrones. Khal Drogo in the books is described with, you know, bells in his hair and, you know, braided mustache and beard and all this kind of stuff that on the screen probably would have looked kind of silly even on Jason Momoa. So yeah, you know, tone down some of that look. But Khal Drogo on the screen still felt like Khal Drogo that I had read in the book, even though some of the descriptive elements were changed. He still felt like Khal Drogo. So you can change physical things. How he acts, with a few exceptions that I was a little aggravated by in the first episode and kept me from watching the show for a very long time. Most of what Khal Drogo does is Khal Drogo. He's not in those ways, in a lot of ways, he is not changed from the books. And the changes that aggravated me were not so much changes to his character, right? As far as the characterization of him, with the exception of one instance. So yeah, it's the look has changed slightly, but you know, the personalities and drives are not. So yeah, it's, you know, that's what I'm talking about. And these are things that, you know, going back to Battle Angel and to Pokemon, well, yeah, these are both properties that have existed in multimedia before. What they adapt over is something anybody can adapt over in a work. You know, we've seen lots of good adaptations where we find adaptations having difficulty. Manga and anime do not always translate easily and well over to American audiences, and that's a shame. But they can. You just have to pay attention to those aesthetic elements and those thematic elements, and you have to make sure that you bring over the ones that are going to keep the aesthetic feel, and that is going to keep the themes that make those worlds and those stories come to life. Video games, you know, Detective Pikachu is a video game adaptation. What is it about Pokemon that makes it Pokemon? What was it about Detective Pikachu that made it Detective Pikachu? You know, what are the aesthetic elements that somebody is going to see and is going to go, that's a Pokemon city? Well, the Growlithes going alongside police, that helps. You know, the Chansey's, you know, working Pokemon centers, that helps. Those are cues, things that, you know, longtime fans of any of the different Pokemon media are going to immediately recognize. Okay, now, what are the thematic elements that make this world come to life? You know, what are those found in? Make sure that you bring those over. Make sure that those are part of your story. So, you know, if you're going to adapt, you know, we're waiting to, I never cared for Sonic to begin with. But, you know, that's going to be a question for looking at the new Sonic movie. A lot of people have already complained about the aesthetic. Sonic doesn't look to people the way they think that Sonic should look. So that's not a good start. But, when you go to watch Sonic, what are the themes that you are expecting from a Sonic property? What are the other aesthetic elements that you expect to have? What are those things that make that world come to life for you? And then when you go and sit down in the movie, do those things come across on the screen? Sonic's look aside, do other aesthetic elements come to life? The themes that made this world and the things that made this world interesting to you, are those brought over? The characters that you experienced in the video games, are you experiencing them in a similar way on the screen? If the answers to these questions are yes, then, Sonic's look aside, you're going to be feeling like this is a good adaptation. The more of these answers that come back as no, you're not going to feel like it's a good adaptation. So, when you're looking at a video game, let's look at a favorite property of mine right now, Fallout. I started Fallout with Fallout 4 and fell in love with Fallout. I play Fallout 76 and I love it, and I will fucking defend that love. I love Fallout 76. I have so much fun when I play it. If somebody was going to make an adaptation of Fallout into a movie, okay, what are the important things that need to be carried over in that adaptation, right? Are we, there's not a whole lot as far as characters that carry over from game to game except dog meat. So I'm just going to say right off, if you make an adaptation of Fallout, you better have dog meat. If you don't, we're going to fight. If you are going to have an adaptation of Fallout, you've got to have that 50s moving towards the future aesthetic. That is just so much a part of Fallout. You have to have the music. Everybody loves this music that plays, and you can find 1,000 playlists on YouTube that is nothing but a collection of the music from Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 and Fallout 2 and whatever. Fallout New Vegas. I don't remember if there's I don't remember if there's a playlist for Fallout 2 music because I didn't play back then. But you have to keep, the music has to stay true. So you have to have a true soundtrack. But then what are the thematic elements, right? There's the atomic scare, right? That's a big part, but that's not the only thing. There's 1,000 warnings about, science, genetic experiments gone wrong, pharmaceuticals, going out of control, capitalism run amok. All of these play into the thematic elements. But then there's also the loneliness. Like, a lot of people complain about the adaptation from Fallout as a single player game to Fallout as an MMO. I have played, Fallout with people, and I have interacted with people in Fallout 76. But by and large, 76 is still a very lonely game. In Fallout 4, you are the sole survivor of Vault 111. In Fallout 3, you're the lone wanderer out of your vault. There is a loneliness inherent to these games, and 76 to me captures that. And if you were to adapt the property to a movie, you would have to capture that. In Fallout 4, you collect all kinds of companions and you build settlements that attract all kinds of people. You can have just a really huge, busy settlement if you stout your character out right. But at the end of the day, at some point you're leaving those companions behind in order to go and do this thing. There is always something about your pain that they are never going to fully understand. And that's important. That's an important aspect of that property. So if you can keep those things, then if you can keep those themes present with the characters, with the plot that you devise, with how you create and shape the world, then you're going to make a good adaptation. The more of those things that you don't keep, the worse your adaptation is going to be. So, and again, kind of drawing back to the beginning, this is all dramatic construction, because if we are talking about something being good because of itself, an adaptation is good because of the elements that it holds true. That's Aristotle's ideas right there. Old ideas that really, these are old ideas, right? Aristotle's from the BCs. There is no reason that Earthsea should not have been adapted better. There is no reason that Man of Steel should have been that. There is no reason that Super Mario Brothers should have been as bad as it was. There is no reason that any adaptation that you looked at and said this is just inadequate, there's no reason that those adaptations should have been bad. Because we have known since the BCs what makes good art. And if you love art in one medium, you're going to want to see those things that you love in the next. And that's not just characters, that's what makes the characters in the setting real. So I'm at my destination. If you liked this, please like, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, yada, yada, yada.